It's now time for the spoilers match of the day between Paint for Femme and No Girls Allowed. Both teams having pretty impressive showings in the first week. Now it's time to start seeing how they're going to do, how they're going to start performing in this next series coming up onto this one. So I'm Jack, and joining me for this next series, we've got Zyronic, Nagura, and Tettles. And friends, this series is also going to determine who goes up against Method EU, and then who starts dropping down into the lower bracket. And either way you slice it, Tettles, it's going to be a tough showing for these guys to make sure they get enough points to get into BlizzCon qualification mode.
Yeah, we're definitely going to need to see both of these teams be able to actually battle through Method EU at some point too. At some point, we actually need to see these teams that are battling for this fourth place spot be able to take games off of these top three teams in Method NA, Abracadabra, and Method EU like we're seeing. So I don't think it's explicitly said that they're going to drop straight into the lower bracket though.
Possibly under that one. So Fortified Explosive teaming with the Underrot. This seems like a pretty nasty affix combination that we got right here, Zyronic.
I feel like Underrot always has a nasty affix combination.
It does. It really does.
There's no good affixes in this dungeon just because of how difficult the trash is. Like a Fortified Underrot in general is already pretty difficult, and any extra affixes on top of that make it pretty dangerous, especially teaming extra mobs and explosive at the same time. That combination is pretty brutal.
It's so nasty onto that one. We'll have to see how these teams are going to be doing as we're getting ourselves ready with 76% voted for No Girls Allowed. All right, let's start checking it out. I feel like these teams are pretty evenly matched on this one, so it should be a very good series as game one in the Underrot gets rolling.
Where's the European love? Come on, chat. I mean, support your Europeans. What is this? I'm disappointed, guys. As you see, both Paint for Femme and No Girls Allowed playing similar comps, but we actually see DK on Shelle. Wow, I don't think I've ever seen Shelle play DK before in Cup play. Wow.
Yeah, this is the first time Shelly's actually played something other than, I think, Rogue in Cup play. So he's been practicing DK a lot. I remember, I think you were specifically saying he was asking, or maybe it was Jag was saying it, he was asking Tegu a lot of DK questions last week. So yeah, not surprising to see him hop on that. He's very good at playing alts, so it's not that surprising to see that come out of him.
Yeah, we see both of the teams doing a pretty huge pull. Fem dropping really low and Trell at the same time. You see the tank struggling so much as Fem actually goes down. Thankfully, you can release and you're straight back there as you are at the entrance of the dungeon. So, but one death already for Paint for Fem. Now, No Girls Allowed actually do commit their Bloodlust here, while Paint for Fem just holds on to it. I assume they use it on the boss later on. Either way, No Girls Allowed not having the tank death. So they are just a little bit faster here, just doing everything a little bit more efficient. They do commit the Bloodlust though.
Yep, I mean, I think the Bloodlust, especially on Trial, this is something we've been talking about. We even talked about it in the first Cup whenever we first saw Underrot on Fortified. Using the Bloodlust on Trash on Fortified makes so much more sense because Elderly Axel will go down super quickly with that prot warrior tank using Spell Reflect. You just don't need that first Bloodlust on the boss. We either see them pop it on the Trash before the first boss, or we see them pop it on their first major Trash pull once they get to Kragmaw's room. One of those two Trash pulls makes the most sense, but when you're looking at teaming Explosive, using it on this first pull makes a lot more sense than I think using it in Kragmaw's room, because you're not going to be able to do that massive pull on teaming at all.
Yeah, and then, Adel actually going down on this pull here, so she needs to release and come back. You see the Ring of Peace come out of him immediately from Undead here to be sure that Trell can survive while Adel is running back. She's dropping very low as well. She might have pulled something on the way back, probably a Matron here, so the Adel has some trouble getting back to the group, as Paint for Femme already working on Elderly Axa, still not committing their Bloodlust, so that probably means that they're going to do a huge pull in the Kragma room where they want to use their Bloodlust later. So I assume that's what they're saving it for. Now the difference with the DK here, I'm not completely sure, but we're just going to keep an eye on the damage meters. Maybe it allows them to do some bigger trash pulls later with the DK. We're also going to see more single target bursts whenever the DK does have the cooldowns ready and whenever they do commit the Bloodlust on single target. Now, No Girls Allowed, they have more trash if you look at it, 4% more, but they just now engaged Elderly Axa.
Yeah, but I think the cool thing to mention here is that both of these teams, I mean, we don't see this too often in this tournament where the teams actually come up with their own specific separate strats. Seeing them actually do something completely different with their Bloodlust leads me to believe that we're going to see completely separate strats. And if you guys want to check out specifically what one team is doing at home, you can always check out squad mode in the top right of your channel there, so you can specifically look at just one of the teams. But Elderly Axa does go down for Paint for Femme early. They still do have the Bloodlust available, and if they are planning on using it early, which they should be pretty soon here, they're probably going to see a very big pull come out in Kragmaw's room from them.
Yeah, and then when you look at the ratios, you can actually see that No Girls Allowed is playing Horde. So you can see the Blood Elf Silence here, the Blood Elf racial on the buff below the group frame, and you see Paint for Femme is playing Alliance. So now we can see the huge pull come out of Pain for Femme. You see half the room actually being pulled here, the Bloodlust being popped, and there's lots of Bloodswarmers here. You can see the fixate on Ricky and Shelle. Ricky unfortunately got stunned by one of the lashes, so he almost went down here, but he did manage to get out of the stun somehow, and now Ricky having a second fixate, but they're doing pretty well so far.
So this is actually an adaptation that we saw in the character select stream backstage. Both Ricky and Beru are actually playing human, so they have every man for himself. They can get out of those lasher stunts just by using their racial. They're just it's a completely separate thing that they've just decided to play for this dungeon in this teaming affix. They can't get all of the kicks in that massive AoE pull, so instead of opting to kick the Decayed Mindcast, they just human racial out of them.
That is such a smart idea, actually, to have those two human racials come in just to get rid of that. Now, usually, I guess it's really smart on the Windwalker, right? Because the Windwalker can dispel it for someone else, but he can't dispel himself. So having the racial available, unfortunately, he got unlucky and did get the debuff 3 times in a row, though. So he already used his human racial, to get out of the first one. So now he doesn't have it available anymore for a little while. But yeah, having it on the Windwalker, really smart. Can use the racial to get out and then dispel the other members who get stunned as well. So you don't need to interrupt. Well, I mean, you can't interrupt them all, right? Because they're just too many costs.
Yeah, and you can see where that puts them ahead, being able to use their Bloodlust on that massive AoE pull. They actually got like 3 packs of trash at the same time with the Bloodlust. That just puts them pretty far ahead of No Girls Allowed, which is kind of surprising considering they've had more deaths. That their pulls haven't been as clean so far. But just because you're able to pull off that massive pull with Bloodlust in this specific room where this trash is the hardest to deal with in the instance, that's going to put you ahead in the dungeon.
Yeah, and then on top of that, we also have a Tides-heavy dungeon here. So we have a lot of Emissary of Tides, which just do not allow you to interrupt. So that's an extra point for the human racial and having the Windwalker, having this dispel. So just generally Tides Emissary in this dungeon, just a very difficult emissary to deal with, just because there's so many difficult trash groups and so many casts that need to be interrupted, especially here in this Krogmar room. And also later on, when you have the Defilers and the Death Speakers, those are the kind of mobs that you just constantly want to interrupt or stun. So having the Emissary of Tides everywhere, definitely a difficult emissary to deal with in this very specific dungeon. Now we see Pain for Femme doing a pretty huge pull again. They do have 2 Bloodswarmers here. Bloodswarmers, definitely one of the most difficult mobs because they fixate random players. They do physical and shadow damage at the same time with their fixate. We see Barrow actually going down, does not have the cheat death available. And now we see Mio actually having 2 fixates at the same time, so he needs to make sure that he kites it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to kite these perfectly, and you can't actually kite them at a distance to where you won't actually ever get hit by them. You can see him, but kind of perfectly positioning himself maybe 10 to 15 yards away. If you kite too far away, they'll charge to you. If you're too close, they'll melee you. There is actually a distance where you can just perfectly kite at the exact kind of move speed of the Feral Bloodswarmer to not ever get hit, and he was doing a very good job. He only got that 1 charge off when only one of the Bloodswarmers was left, so good to see that kind of mechanic play coming out of them. Beru did release, and he's going to be able to stealth back, but he's going to be a little bit before he catches up with the team. He might be able to kind of catch up right as they pull this trash back, but just kind of a heads up play from him, so they don't have to worry about casting any other reses here.
Yeah, now we see a double pull come in. We see Femme just throwing an axe to the skeleton pack here, to the Guardians, as you can see them come in now, and the rest of the pack that is still in the room with the Lashers and the Maggots being pulled on top. So now in this pack, they need to be careful that they deal with the Maggot interrupt, which does do the frontal cast. It needs to be interrupted because it can be very deadly if you get hit by it. And then on top of that, we also have the Death Speaker that needs to be handled, probably by Baru, by the Rogue, making sure it's interrupting the Wicked Frenzy and interrupting the Guardian spawn as well. Now they actually pulled Krogma on top, so this is a pretty significant pull again by Pain for Femme, having to deal with all of those trash mobs and also dealing with the boss.
And again, there were Lashers in that pull, and it's kind of good to know that if that Lasher decides to cast its Decaying Mind on 50% of the group, and can't cast it on the tank, obviously, can cast on either the Rogue or the Windwalker, they can just racial it off and not have to worry about it. That's just like that extra layer of protection that you have when you're doing those major pulls, that you don't really have to worry about some of those casts. It makes the pull a lot easier to pull off. And now they only have to deal with the Guardian, which is pretty easy to deal with. It's just extra tank damage on this fight, and the tank's going to be dropping low quite a bit here from the trash, but I don't think he should go down. The healer should be pumping heals into him. Mio was not going to be doing that much damage on this pull because of that, but the efficiency of the cleave on top of the boss should be worth it.
Yeah, and I do believe the Guardian did spawn from a death speaker, so they didn't interrupt one of the raised death casts. But again, as long as they keep Fem alive, which does drop really low here, it actually goes down. They don't have a battle rest available at all. So they're going to have to reset the boss. There's no way they can finish off this boss without that tank. I mean, if it would be the healer that is set, then maybe, but without a tank, it's just impossible. So huge setback for Pain for Fem here. Now, this is a time for No Girls Allowed to come back, but they also have one death on their side, as Undead is that their Windwalker, unfortunately. Now, they do not have to reset, though, because just having a damage dealer dead just means it's going to take a little bit longer. They're still going to be able to do it, though.
I mean, yeah, this isn't going to be quite a full reset because they still do have to deal with the trash. They had to reset the boss so they would get out of boss combat so that Fem could release and get back to the group. He'd have to invis pop back through all the trash that they skipped. So, I mean, I blame myself. I kind of cast a curse in there again. That's probably like the 10th time this has happened in the past couple of weeks where he said something shouldn't happen and then it happens. So I'm sorry, that's my fault, Fem. You can blame me.
Right, they reset as well. No Girls Allowed.
It ended up resetting. Yeah, it was. Oh, I mean, this is just kind of sloppy play from both teams, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
so I mean, they're still kind of both in it. We have 5 extra deaths on the side of Pain for Fem, however, so 25 seconds on the board. In the 4 No Girls Allowed to worry about. They've got that extra 25 seconds of 5 less deaths. And looks like they've got all the trash in the room that they want to deal with dealt with, even though they are behind on trash. They've just pulled less at the start of the instance. So, I mean, things are actually pretty close still here. We're going to see No Girls Allowed probably pull the boss before Pain for Fem, because they still do have to res. And it looks like he was in combat with the Bloodswarmer, which is a little unfortunate. He was able to Shadow Melt it off and get the res off, so it's not going to be that big of a deal.
Yeah, beauty of Shadow Melt. So that's something No Girls Allowed does not have available to them, right? They are playing Horde for this Arcane Torrent to get rid of the shields from the Guardians. One thing, I actually wonder why they reset the boss, because, I mean, yes, they didn't have the rest ready, but I just feel like they might have been able to do it without. Maybe Edel was just saying she does not have enough mana to heal through this whole fight with only 2 damage dealers. Maybe they just made a call and reset because of that. But at this point, they have their battle rest ready now. It just came back up, so at this point, they could have rested of Undead. So I'm not completely sure if this was a worth decision for No Girls Allowed. Either way, Pain for Fem are on the boss now as well. Both of them fighting Crag mode. I mean, No Girls Allowed slightly ahead on boss percentage, but this is still going to be a close match. No Girls Allowed Bloodlust ready in 20 seconds, which I assume, I mean, if I was them, I would probably just use it on cooldown now, because they will get another one.
It's going to be close, right? It's going to be really close. They actually very, very well could get a third Bloodlust off. But we've always talked about in Underrot, specifically with how dangerous the trash is in here, that we would, especially on Fortified, like to see them use their second Bloodlust on a big trash pull, maybe the one right before Unbound Abomination at the end of the dungeon. But I don't think we've ever seen a team do the dungeon and not use their second Bloodlust on the final boss. So it'd be interesting to see maybe a different play from them. They clearly aren't planning on using the second Bloodlust for the rest of the boss here. And we're probably going to end up seeing both bosses go down at pretty much the same time as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's also something you don't want to... I mean, if they really plan on using their Bloodlust on a trash pack, then it makes sense that they're saving it here. But I'm pretty sure if they want to use it in the last boss, then there would be 10 minutes in between here and then. I assume so. I'm not completely sure. Of course, they know better than I do on how their times are in practice. Now, Pain for Fem, they still have a longer cooldown on their Bloodlust because they saved it for this trash pull in the Kragma room that we saw earlier. They should be able to finish off the boss here without any more problems. No Girls Allowed, of course, being a little bit faster on their side. And now both teams do have a battle rest available again. So if something goes wrong for either of those teams, they have the safety net of getting them back up.
Does look like Shelly's kind of falling off in single target damage here, but you can see underneath his player frame at the top of the screen there, he is saving all of his cooldowns for what I would assume is going to be a big pull here that the Unholy DK will carry damage on. No Girls Allowed also kind of doing a similar, like this isn't a huge pull from them. This is a very small pull, but because you normally will see teams combine these skeletons with 2 extra mobs, exactly what we see Pain for Fem doing here. We should see the Unholy DK carry a lot of the damage on this pack with all of his cooldowns up. No Girls Allowed, they don't have the Unholy DK to actually, kind of spew out the AoE damage, but they do end up actually pulling the Defiler and the Death Speaker afterwards, not at the same time. So they're not going to have that added benefit of having the full-on AoE right ahead. And you can see on the side of Pain for Fem that Unholy DK doing a lot of damage.
And the green rogue, so I mean, look at both of those Windwalkers doing so much damage as well. That's impressive. definitely think we're going to see more Windwalkers in almost all of the setups or in the team comps in the future. Last time around, we did see these like triple rogue setups without having the Windwalkers, but now that with the rogue nerf coming in, we just see the Windwalkers a lot more again this time around. They do provide a lot of damage, and of course we also have the 5% physical damage buff and the utility. I mean, the utility that the Windwalker provide is definitely very useful in some of those dungeons. Just having the Ring of Peace, especially with certain affixes with Sanguine or something like that, or Necrotic even. So nice to see those Windwalkers being back again. And now we see Pain for Femme engaging Sporecaller Sancha with the Emissary of Tides on top here, 2 of them even, so very efficient play by them. And No Girls Allowed actually popping their Bloodlust on a trash pull here.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Like we mentioned, I like seeing the Bloodlust on the trash, but I really liked the pull setup that Pain for Femme did there. They kept the Tides Emissary that they had perma-rooted from the previous pull. They ended up pulling it down around the side of these 2 Defilers that you see right in front of the boss, and they actually ring a piece the 2 Defilers away from the Emissary of the Tides, and well, they ring a piece the Tides into the boss, and then they gripped it once it was out of range of them, because apparently it's not social with that group. I thought it would be, but it doesn't pull the Defilers until you actually manually pull them. Ooh, Shelly going down, unfortunately. They do have the battle res for him, though, so they'll get him right up. That was a little bit unfortunate for them. But yeah, I like that pull strategy from them. They deal with the Tides Emissaries first, and then after the Tides are gone, they can then pull both of the Death Speakers and the Defilers in and just deal with interrupts manually.
So one of the casts of the Defiler actually went through here, which applied a curse in the whole group. And it was interesting to see that Nevo just chose to not dispel anyone. He probably just didn't want to pick a favorite player because it does reduce your damage done. So instead of just picking one of the favorite, he just didn't dispel anyone. And now the curse went through again. This time around, we did see a dispel come through on Femme. So now we all know that he likes Femme the most. And there's going to be a full team wipe coming in. I think it was one of the Shadow Ball volleys that went through or something like that. But we saw a huge AoE coming through. Full team up. That's such a disaster for Pain for Femme as they're now on 17 deaths. 2 full wipes on a boss.
Well, yeah, once one of your melee DPS is dead, you kind of have to let one of the casts go through, right? Because you need 2 melee kicks per Defiler in order to get interrupts. And once one of those melee is dead, you just have to commit to letting one of the casts go through. And that cast going through plus the residual damage of the fight ended up wiping them, which is really unfortunate. That's 17 deaths on the board, which is very peculiar for a team of this caliber. I mean, Shelly and Finn, they've been around for a long time, so this is kind of unfortunate to see from them. They'll just kind of have to get it together and hope that they can, play better in the next 2 maps. Because, I mean, this is the first map of the series, right? This isn't over. It does look like they're gonna lose this map just because of this poor play, unfortunately. But, you kind of have to get it together and play well in the next map. They have to put it behind them. This is just a mistake. That's really kind of the mindset you have to have going forward.
Most definitely, but we can see that Pain for Femme does have those really nice strategies, right? We saw those small little things they did with the emissaries, and we saw the huge pull in the Kragma room. So they have their strategies down, I believe. And I also talked to Ricky, to the Windwalker, and he told me that they were very disappointed by getting disqualified so early in the first Western Cup. And he said that their best, like Ataldazar, is faster than Abracadabra's perfect Ataldazar. And he just was disappointed. He said all of their strategies are so good, and all of their best runs they can compete with the best of the best in the Western region. So they were really disappointed. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe their strategies are just, they require them to have this perfect play, and they just don't manage to execute it. Maybe that is the problem. They're just putting too much on themselves with those huge pulls. Maybe they just need more practice, or maybe go a little bit smaller with the pulls. I'm not completely sure. But right now, they're definitely not showing up.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that. I mean, there's definitely something to be said about different playstyles between teams. It looks like Pain for Femme is the type of team that reminds me a lot of Shell's Angels, where they'll have these insane strats where if they pull them off, it looks amazing and they're going to have an insane time. But if they make any one mistake, it's going to set them so far behind of any other team that goes for a more consistent strategy that the consistent team would end up winning out more often. I mean, it usually comes up pretty close together, like, a best of 3 series. They only have to have one of their dungeons go poorly, and the team that has the insane strats will win. So there's kind of a trade-off there, right? Like those 2 different types of styles definitely are interesting to see. And it looks like No Girls Allowed are definitely the team that's going for the more consistent strategy here. And because they haven't messed up as much, they're going to end up winning this dungeon.
Yeah, right. Because it seemed like Pain for Femme was being ahead this whole time, and it seemed like they were having those greater pulls and the better strategy. But if you're not going to execute it, then there's no point in having the greater strategy and having those huge pulls. If it only works 1 out of 5 times, then it's just not good enough for a cup play, right? So No Girls Allowed definitely showing up. They do have those 4 deaths, and they also had to reset the boss, the Kragma boss, but there's, I mean, Pain for Femme making even more mistakes. And that going down here on this trash, probably got hit by one of those tentacles or by a frontal, by the Madding Gaze. So definitely mistake here, as Adel also procs the staff here. So there's some problems with this trash pull for No Girls Allowed. Now they don't have any more battle rests available to them, so they have to finish the dungeon without any more mistakes. Pain for Femme also having another death on Shelley without battle rest available.
Yeah, and they don't have the Bloodlust available for the final boss, which is what we normally see from most teams. It is fortified, so the boss has a lot less HP to chew through, even without Bloodlust. But that Bloodlust, I mean, usually we see teams deal with at least half of the boss's HP in the Bloodlust timer alone. So, I mean, it definitely speeds up the encounter a lot. So we'll have to see. I mean, there's still a lot of problems to deal with on Unbound Abomination there. So, I mean, we've seen some healer one-shots come out from those spores, so as long as they play clean, I mean, they have to play clean still. This dungeon isn't over quite yet. The last boss can be pretty brutal if you make any mistakes.
Yeah, and we haven't really talked about the affixes yet. There's explosive now, explosive and teaming. So on those really huge pulls, the explosive can cause a lot of problems. Now, we talked about how good rogues are at killing explosive this whole time, and that's why usually we don't really pay attention to explosive too much, because barely any of them go through, because the rogues just switch to them, they finish it off, and outlaw rogues don't even lose damage because they just cleave off of the explosives on the rest of the trash. So we never really see any of those explosives go through just because of those rogue setups. But Pain for Femme actually only has 1 rogue. So they definitely have a little bit of a worse setup when it comes to explosive killing. And maybe that's what caused them to have those problems as well. Because they did wipe on Sancha when they pulled the trash on top of it. So maybe they just had too many explosives on top of needing to interrupt. And then they just got overwhelmed by all of those things that they have to do at the same time.
Yep, first Blood Visages are going to be coming out for No Girls Allowed here on their side. Every time you finish one of those off, it'll deal 1/6 of the boss's HP, so they'll have to deal with 3 sets of 2 Blood Visages in order to finish off the encounter. First one's being dealt with by Titan Keeper Hezrel for them right now, and they're already halfway through the next set. So it looks like they're, steady course right now. They'll have that battle res coming up for them in about 20 seconds here as well, so should they have any mistakes, any DPS going down or the tank going down, Edel will be able to res them right up as well. So really, you kind of just have to keep an eye on Edel. As long as Edel stays alive, they should be totally fine here.
Yeah, as long as she doesn't die, they should be fine. Now, again, this is a 45 setting, so Unbound Abomination should not be the biggest deal. I believe even if you get hit by a spore, it should not just straight up one-shot you, so Edel should be fine even if she gets hit by one of those spores. Now, we don't want that to happen, but still, it should be fine. One more thing to note here that, as you said, Bloodlust not being used for the last boss, something we really liked. We talked about it the last time around, where we said we don't really like that they're saving the Bloodlust for Unbound Abomination, because it did make sense for the spring season, where you had the Reaping on top of the boss, it was tyrannical, so it all kind of made sense that they were saving the Bloodlust. But now with the 45 setting and the trash being so difficult in this dungeon, makes much more sense that they're using it for trash. So I like that coming out from both of those teams as well.
Yep, final set of Blood Visages spawning in now for No Girls Allowed, and the Titan Keeper will end up dealing with both of them for them. And it wasn't a pretty run, it wasn't a fast run, but sometimes, slow and steady wins the race.
That was some kind of run there, but No Girls Allowed does end up finishing first as they take game number 1 on to the Underrot. Decent job onto that one. I don't know, there's so much build-up to these teams in so many ways, Tettles, on that end. I was very disappointed by this first matchup.
I mean, they were trying to pull like they're a first-place team, but they just don't have the execution. It may end up coming down just like practice time. I know both of these teams don't end up having just like unlimited time to practice, and these pulls in Underrot can be very, very challenging just because it is this Tides heavy beguiling setting.
Sure, but compared to what we've seen from both of these teams before, I definitely expected a higher caliber.
Yeah, and like we saw last week, these teams actually, whenever they're playing to their like top level, they are actually incredibly good, and they can even contend with the top 3 teams. So we need to be seeing them actually making it to that level. Pain for Femme and No Girls Allowed, both at the very beginning of the instance, actually were playing at an insane level. Pain for Fem with this pull into Kragmaw is actually just astounding with how big it actually ends up being. But unfortunately, Fem ends up actually getting just meleeed down by the Emissary of the Tides during the intermission phase wherever Kragmaw is trampling, and they end up having to reset the boss. Similar situation where No Girls Allowed just loses a DPS, and they end up having to reset Kragmaw as well. And so that kind of put them on even footing. If No Girls Allowed actually didn't have to have this Kragmaw reset, they would have had a way more aggressive time. But then Paint for Fem just has a little bit more mistakes. Shelly ends up going down on Sporecaller Zancha, and then that's just pretty much the end of it, because with all the kicks that are actually required in that pull that they were doing on Sporecaller, the casts end up just going off from the Defilers and ends up wiping them up. And then No Girls Allowed ends up taking the match there.
They do end up taking it onto that one, and there were, in between any of the wipes, there were some very successful pulls. Let's start talking about some of those titles.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see the 2 human form plus Icebound Fortitude way that you're actually able to break the stun from Paint for Fem here. They end up doing a huge pull, and basically those Disease Lashers, whenever they actually do cast their Decaying Mind cast, it will end up stunning you. So you actually see Ricky there. He ends up instantly using every man for himself, which will end up breaking the stun, but then he instantly gets stunned again, and you can actually you're able to heal through it or dispel it off, so it's actually kind of unlucky. But Paint for Fem is actually able to salvage this pull still, with everybody not being stunned after Merwo ends up breaking Ricky out, and then the pull ends up being salvaged. So that was actually one of the most dangerous pulls for Paint for Fem. So if they're able to do this high caliber, high risk, high reward pull and do it with good success, like, they should be able to like shore up some of these issues that they had in the middle of the dungeon. But both of these teams, they had some really good moments. They had some kind of question marks, like we were saying. So we're going to see what they actually bring moving forward.
We'll have to, because Shrine of the Storm, and we saw just between Method EU and Fly Me Out, was not an easy dungeon for them either. So a lot of expectations under these guys. We take it to a quick break before we go into Game 2. We'll be right back. After a rough Game 1, Pain for Fem and No Girls Allowed are getting themselves ready for game number 2 in Shrine of the Storm, which is sure to be a very cool one with Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Skittish. We've already seen a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors coming out of Fly Me Out when they're running this dungeon. Let's go in and let's see how these teams perform.
Yeah, so Shrine, we've seen it before by Method EU, just having a very, very clean run. I wonder if Pain for Fem and No Girls Allowed actually were watching that Shrine, because they knew they have to play this dungeon later on. Maybe they were, seeing some things, maybe adapting something very last second. Usually, you can't rehaul or change your whole strategy right before a match, but maybe some small things they could have copied in between. Like, I think it was approximately an hour in between those teams, so should be. We will see what they do here.
Something really interesting in the start here. It's taken a long time for Pain for Fem to set up their first pull here. No Girls Allowed, they just instantly went to it and popped Lust. They went right away. Pain for Fem took a good 15-20 seconds to make sure that Enchanted Emissary was gone and away, and then they did their pull. That just seems like a little bit, maybe they're trying to play extra safe for some particular reason. Like, they're really worried like maybe this pull had some problems in practice for them. But that's just kind of interesting to see. I feel like that's super safe to play for them. They spent a lot of time setting that up, whereas No Girls Allowed already finished their first pull and moving on in the dungeon. So just really interesting play style right away for Pain for Fem.
Yeah, it also doesn't seem like they're dealing with bolstering that well. You can see some of those mobs already died off, while the rest of the mobs still pretty high HP. So not perfect bolstering management here out of Pain for Fem. Now they did swap back to that Rogue. You can see Shelle on Rogue again. Of course, bolstering not really something you want to run a DK on. We've seen that a little bit from the Eastern region, but definitely was not a big fan of the DK on bolstering at the same time.
Yeah, and I imagine if they plan on using the Bloodlust on anything but the boss, they're going to use it on this next big pull that they end up doing here. Probably another snap into one of the basins here as well, so we'll have to keep an eye on that for Pain for Fem. No Girls Allowed have already moved on and done another snap of the mobs in front of Aquaseer, along with the 2 apprentices on the side after Aquaseer, so they just snapped 2 pulls together on top of each other. Another efficient pull that we've seen from a lot of different teams. It looks like Pain for Fem is about to do something similar on their side as well, but they've just done it much, much slower than No Girls Allowed has.
Yeah, they're actually pulling the trash group here in front of Aquaseer with the Enchanted Emissary. You can just see it being damaged to make sure that it's knocked back, does not apply this reflection aura on top of these mobs here. Now, you see the damage coming out of Ricky, out of the Windwalker. It's huge AoE damage, huge burst. They fall off a little bit afterwards, right? They have this huge burst at the start and then they fall off a little bit. It's at least what I've seen in the past. But No Girls Allowed, they're pretty far ahead as they're already fighting Aqua Seer. They did also pull Heldis on top, which is something we've seen a lot. Almost every group has done this so far. So they pull Heldis on top. They do not want to finish off Heldis before Aqua Seer because it does bolster, so you do not want to do that. But you can make use of the buff on the floor. As you can see, the rogues with their increased auto attack range from Outlaw and Edelweiss standing in it. Now they had to move away. But yeah, just clever use of the mechanic here. It does do AoE damage, so Edelweiss needs to make sure she heals the AoE away, but it's manageable.
I liked seeing that view of Mimo there whenever they did the setup for that trash pull where they had the 2 rogue saps into pulling the initiates up with the rest of the group as the rest of the trash died, so the bolstering didn't get very bad. That was pretty cool POV to see. But we're seeing the same thing from Pay for Femme as we see from No Girls Allowed. Windspeaker Heldis pull on top of the boss purely for that extra haste buff. Obviously, they're not going to try to kill it off. They don't want to end up bolstering the boss. They're okay with bolstering the Aqualings because those have a lot less HP, and they can bolster them when they're low HP too, so it's not that big of a deal. So yeah, just the extra haste buff on the boss we see a lot. Still haven't popped Bloodlust yet for Pain for Femme. They're holding on to it for something. I'm really interested to see what it is. Now, that being said, I remember in the first West Cup, we were talking a lot about Pain for Femme holding on to their Bloodlust, and I got messaged by Shelly afterwards, oh yeah, we just forgot to hit it. So hopefully they didn't do that again. That would be interesting to see. Hopefully they're just saving it for some big bull coming.
I hope so as well. But yeah, you can see, as we mentioned, right? We see the 2 apprentices here being CC'd with 1 blind and then in cap by the Windwalker. So very nice mechanics, very efficient really to do this kind of strategy. To not, they're probably going to pull them on top of the boss later or at the very end, but they're just going to keep them CC'd here, I assume. Now, one thing to note though is that blind does not last forever, and it does have a greater cooldown than what it lasts for. So at some point they will have to replace the blind with something else. So we'll see what they do there. And Aqua Seer on 50% for 58% for Pain for Femme, while No Girls Allowed already fighting the intermission phase, and Undead actually fell off.
It looked like he got hit by one of the charges. That's not good. Fortunately, he did it when they were almost done with the phase, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. He will have to release afterwards and then catch up with the team, but there's no trash. He can just skip the trash. That's not that big of a deal. Actually, he is resable. He didn't get knocked off. He just barely got knocked in a place where he could get res. That's still a little unfortunate. I don't know if I would have committed the battle res with the boss at 15%. They do also have to finish off Windspeaker though, so maybe they think it's a lot closer than it is right now. I mean, they are pretty, for where they are in the dungeon, they're pretty significantly ahead right now.
Yeah, that is true. Not only are they ahead at the boss percentage, but they also have more trash. It's just 3%, but in Shrine with a bolstering affix, that does mean something, right? So No Girls Allowed in the lead. Without a battle rest, they do have to be careful at this point, though, because not being able to get anyone back up, like tank deaths or something like that, are going to cause huge problems. Pain for Femme having some trouble here as they fight the intermission phase of Mevo actually going down. They might be able to finish the boss off without Mevo, but they have Heldis. And Heldis does do AoE damage. It is tyrannical, so Heldis is not being buffed by that fortified, but they need to make sure that they use their defensive cooldowns properly here for the Gale wins. You can see the AoE coming out. And once the intermission phase is over, the boss actually does not have a lot of HP left, but on a tyrannical setting without a healer, this might be causing some problems here.
I mean, Ricky can do some off-healing. The rogues have Crimson Vial. The only person I'm really worried about is Femme, but he's just going to be spamming out Ignore Pains just to absorb as much damage as possible. Ricky did pop Touch of Death, so the boss should be going down pretty quick, but we got to keep an eye on Femme here because there's a lot of damage coming out of him. Ricky is also dropping very low as well. It's going to be spooky, but they should hopefully be able to get it down. I don't want no. Never mind. I'm cursing them. No. I did it. Come on. Please finish the boss off. I don't want to curse them again, please.
Femme died, so Aqua Seer at 5%. I feel like they're not going to make it. 5% on a tyrannical boss is still a lot of HP. You can see the repulse come out of Shelley just tanking it off, but Ricky just dying immediately from 1 auto attack. 3%. It's only Beru alive. He does have the cheat death and the repulse ready, so they might know Shelley going down as well. They're probably not going to make it. 2%. Beru, you're the only one.
Come on, Beru.
You can do it, Beru.
Please, Beru. Crit. Just crit.
Oh, he's got the debuff as well.
One crit. That's all you got to do. One crit.
1%.
Come on, one crit.
No.
Oh, my gosh.
What a disaster. This is going to cost him so much time. dude, don't you think they should have just committed the Bloodlust once Fem died? Or once Miva died, even?
I mean, yeah, there's a
Right?
lot of stuff they could have done differently there.
I know.
That's just all really unfortunate for them. I mean, you gotta wonder, maybe there's some nerves coming out from them there. I didn't even see what Miva died to. That's really unfortunate
I didn't
on their
see
side.
either.
I mean, geez, that's about as kind of 1% boss wipe in this tyrannical setting. And I mean, they didn't commit their Bloodlust, but I mean, they should have once the healer went. You're right. They probably should have once the healer went down. That's really unfortunate. On the side of no girls allowed, however, it's just business as usual. They're just cruising on in the dungeon right now.
Yeah, so they're doing this really dangerous pull that we've seen from other teams before, where they pull the Bridge Elemental on top of this trash. This is not a mistake. This is actually what those teams are planning to do. They want to have the Elemental to get the extra percentage, and they want to have this trash pack on top. Now, it is bolstering, so they want to make sure that you do not kill the trash before the Elemental, because you do definitely not want to bolster this mini-boss. It does do a lot of AoE damage. You can see the Lightning, the Shipbreaker Storm come out, doing huge amounts of AoE damage to everybody. It can be avoided by going line of sight, but you don't want to do that because you don't do any damage line of sight. So Edelweiss just healing through the damage, doing 71k HPS. So insane amounts of healing come out of Edel here.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to see teams actually pull that mini boss now because we're so used to seeing them skip past, and we're so used to seeing so many teams fail to skip past. So a lot of teams have just said, you know what, we're going to kill it anyways. Even if it's bolstering, we'll focus it down. That's just kind of a funny difference to see from what we're used to seeing. They're going to end up doing a lot of trash before this boss here. They're going to do a lot of individual trash pulls because they have to make sure they don't bolster mobs up too much. Specifically, what we're going to be looking at is if they're going to be doing that massive 20 Tide Sage Initiate pull, which can go horribly wrong if you're not actually focusing on doing purely like passive AoE cleave, no single target whatsoever, just to make sure the bolstering doesn't get out of hand. We saw Mythic Dungeon do a very good job of it earlier, and even then they still had a couple of mobs that were a little higher than the others, but they were able to focus them down even more. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on whether or not No Girls Allowed is really going to be able to extend their lead here by pulling off these bolstering pulls well.
Yeah, and again, they don't have any battle rests, so if something goes wrong, it's gonna cause some trouble. The next battle rest is gonna come up soon. They just need to be careful with this very initiate pull. You can see they're waiting right here. No one is doing any damage. They're waiting until every single initiate is stacked up. Then we can see them start doing AoE damage. And they try to kill them as evenly as possible. Of course, it's difficult to kill them all at the very exact same time. So that's why you see some of those mobs, some of the initiates being bolstered. But it seemed to be somewhat even, so they should be able to finish them off. Hopefully no one gets aggro. And oh wow, we even saw the stun being saved for the very last second here from Undead. I really like that, to save it for the very last second, just to be sure that they don't turn around and just melee hit them and one-shot them.
I think that was even better than Mythic you did. That was super clean.
Well done.
That was very well done by them. I wonder if this is really interesting right now because we're not seeing them instantly go over to that spot that we saw Mythic use, and that was kind of what we saw from the eastern region. We saw both, I believe, Buff Warner Rogue and Team D using that spot on the rock on the side to not have to worry about tornadoes. We're not seeing that at all from No Girls Allowed. Maybe they just either don't know of this strat or they haven't practiced it or they don't think that they want to use it. That's really interesting to see them not use that at all because not having to worry about the tornadoes changes all the positioning of this fight. You can interrupt every single slicing blast. You don't have to worry about letting them through because you don't have to worry about the positional requirements on this fight. You can just tank the boss in the exact same position. So interesting to see them not use that strategy.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think they probably just, maybe they just don't know or haven't seen it. That's definitely possible because I don't see a downside from it. I mean, there might be some problems with the boss resetting because the boss does reset as soon as you drag him out of the circle of this boss area, right? So maybe there's some problems with that. Maybe if the tank goes too far or someone gets aggro and then it resets, maybe it happened to them in practice and that's why they're not doing it. We don't know. But one thing to note is that No Girls Allowed actually did use their second Bloodlust here. So the first Bloodlust was committed on the first trash pull in this dungeon, and now it just came back up, so they used the second Bloodlust, meaning they definitely think the dungeon is gonna take at least 21-22 minutes because they will want the Bloodlust for the last boss as well.
Yep, Aquasphere has finally gone down for Pain for Femme on their side. They were able to get that down, and they still haven't used that Bloodlust. At this point, it's got to be, and they have to have it planned for one of these trash pulls. Otherwise, I don't know why they would have been sitting on it. Maybe they're just being stubborn. There's the Bloodlust. They were planning on using it for the Guardian Elemental all along. I didn't mean it was wrong. That was just a slip of the tongue. Maybe, I mean, if they were planning on using it for this pull, maybe they've had issues here before where the Guardian Elemental was doing way too much damage to the group. It makes sense. It's not a particularly easy pull to pull off. So, if they were planning on using it here the entire time, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, so one thing to note about No Girls Allowed here, that was interesting. So we actually saw Trell move out of the platform. Again, this boss does reset as soon as he steps out of this platform. And we saw Trell jumping down and leaping back up, doing something. I wasn't watching the whole thing unfold, but I saw them aggroing those apprentices, those trash mobs. So that was pretty risky because I assume someone else taunted the boss for a little while, because if Trell does have aggro and just moves away, you do not want to reset this boss at this stage of the boss HP, because they're already down with Gale Color Fae and only 40% left for Brother Ironhall. So definitely don't want to risk that. And this bowstring, so they don't want to finish off the apprentices before the boss, but they could cleave them down. I'm not completely sure what they plan on doing with the apprentices here. Maybe they just want to completely avoid them. Never mind. Now they're engaging them, so they were just waiting for Brother Ironhall to be a little bit lower, to be approximately the same HP as those apprentices have, to be able to just cleave them down evenly.
Yeah, we saw two completely different strategies coming out of the eastern region, where they both used that rock section to kind of stand up and dodge the tornadoes. But we saw two completely different strategies in terms of boss cleave. One of the teams just kind of flat cleaved both bosses, killed them at the exact same time. The other team decided to do exactly what No Girls Allowed is doing, where they killed Gale Color Fae as quickly as possible. And then once Brother Ironhole got to 30-40%, they ended up pulling both of the apprentices in and cleaving them on top of the boss. So it looks like they're just kind of going with that strategy, obviously without the kind of spot on the side. But it's the same strategy in general, where you want to make sure you're cleaving on top of the boss and you're not bolstering the boss at the same time. This is just very efficient cleave from them. So good to see. Afterwards, I mean, this is the scary pull in the dungeon, right? They're pulling a lot of enforcers here. This can be a lot of tank damage.
Yeah, definitely gotta watch out for this specific pull here for No Girls Allowed, as Trell just charges in with this emissary, enchanted emissary being dealt with by the rest of the DPS. You can see the other enforcers coming in as well, so lots of enforcers on Trell. He does have his shield wall up right now, and once he runs out of defensives, he needs to just leap away and run and kite them, because he's not gonna be able to tank them anymore without any sort of defensives left. You can see Trell just starting to walk away now, and Sisi coming out of this group probably use the Ring of Peace here as well, and the rest of the group also needs to make sure that they interrupt the caster as well, because it does cast an AoE that you do not want to let through.
Yeah, so it's interesting thing to think about for No Girls Allowed. This is a team, I mean, even going back to last season when they had Riva Fevi as their tank for one of the cups, this is a team that's been able to put together very, very good runs that have just come down to one mistake that have cost them the map. And that's kind of got to be something that's in the back of your head whenever you're going through this dungeon. It's like, oh man, we're doing great right now. Everything's going great. Where are we going to mess this up? Because it's something that will go through your head whenever you play well in practice, but every single time you get to cup play, you make some silly mistake that costs you the dungeon. So hopefully they're not getting too in their heads right now. Hopefully it's just, like I said earlier, business as usual. Hopefully they're practiced enough to where that's not something that's bothering them.
Yeah, and this was such a well-executed pull too with the enforcers, because usually we see teams have the tank just, leap away and run away, making sure he does not get hit by the enforcers. But what No Girls Allowed did here was Trell was actually kiting the enforcers in a very small circle to make sure that all of them stay as stacked up as possible, because the enforcers are melee, while the ritualist is a caster. So if you run far away as a tank, then the enforcers will walk further while the ritualist stays behind, and therefore they're spreading out, and it's going to be harder to AoE them at the same time. So specifically with bowstring, it's so important to keep them gathered up. So by having Trell just running around in a smaller circle, it is riskier because he could get hit, but it's so much more efficient to have the even DPS. We see Trell actually almost going down here on this tentacle pull though, but they did recover.
Well, that was a little scary for a second there, but they were able to get through it just fine. Once this final cultist goes down, they should be totally fine. They should be able to skip the rest of the bridge trash and just go into the tentacles, which will be interesting to see. Maybe Edda will decide to proc her staff there, or proc it on accident to one-shot all the tentacles. That'd be cool to see. But we do typically see healers hold on to their staff proc until the very end of the dungeon to deal with the final eel packs, which is also something, usually you want to see them proc it on AoE because it does do damage to everything around you. It doesn't have any diminishing returns on AoE. But it's interesting to talk about. These two teams are the teams to watch right now in this tournament, because both of them are really the only other two teams outside of 40K that are in the running for BlizzCon. It kind of feels like those top three spots are locked up. You have Method NA and Method EU who have already qualified for BlizzCon. You have Abracadabra, who has been looking even better in this summer season, and they kind of have that third slot. It has their name on it if they keep playing the way they're playing. But these are the two teams that can compete with 40K for that fourth slot. And No Girls Allowed, they beat Pain for Femme last week. They knocked them out of the tournament, and it looks like they're going to take them out again here 2-0. But the important thing to mention is the team that wins here is going to be playing against Method EU. And I mean, I don't think the way either of these teams has been playing in this match is good enough to beat Method EU. So if they end up losing to Method EU and going to the lower bracket, should everything go the way that seeding works, they're going to end up playing against 40K in the lower bracket. So, I mean, there's a lot of BlizzCon ramifications here for these matchups. I mean, these teams have to play as good as possible to have any chance of making it to BlizzCon.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, 40K didn't do so well in the first cup. Now, of course, that could just be, you know, they had a bad day or whatever. There's definitely a lot of things that could have went wrong, and they can still prove it themselves. And that's something we talked about a lot as well. In the spring season, 40K was a team that didn't do so well at the start, but they constantly improved over the course of the season, and they got really, really good at the very end. Now, this time around, they didn't do so well the first cup. Now they have a roster swap as well, so we actually see Kurisu this time around. They did swap Lofus out. Not sure if that's going to be helping them or hurting them. Usually if you are playing with a team for a very long time and then you have to make a roster swap, it does hurt you. So I'm not completely sure if they will cause any sort of problems for them, but we will see when we see them play later on. And No Girls Allowed, definitely they had a really good Shrine. I think the first time they played Shrine in the summer season, they played against Method EU, and they were really close. I think they almost beat them. They did have some silly mistake, but their Shrine is pretty good, and you can see it right here.
I mean, they're definitely playing very clean in this dungeon. Unfortunately, I think they're, in terms of comparing it to Method U's time we saw earlier today, they're still pretty significantly behind by about a minute and a half. But that being said, I mean, with how good Method U is playing, I mean, their time trial times were insane this week. With how good Method U is playing, you know, if I had a team right now and all of our times were only 1 or a minute and a half behind Method U's times, I'd be like, you know what, we're doing pretty good right now. I'm okay with that. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it is pretty impressive the way they're playing right now.
No, I definitely agree, and I don't think they need to be first to be able to make it to BlizzCon. Of course, it depends on how the other teams are performing, right? It specifically depends on how 40K is performing. If No Girls Allowed gets a really good seeding, if they get second or third, they might be able to still beat 40K in points if 40K doesn't do so well. So it definitely depends on both of those teams' performances. Either way, No Girls Allowed does need to get a pretty high seeding to get those points to be able to get to BlizzCon. So they want to be playing really well, even if they don't beat Method U. You know, they don't have to get first, but they definitely need to hold up to Abracadabra, to Method NA, and to also 40K, of course.
And I mean, they have to do it both weeks too, unless they come out with a tournament win and 40K does poorly both weeks. No Girls Allowed or Pain for Femme, they both have to come up with very high, we're talking top 3 performances in order to make it to BlizzCon, with 40K getting last place in both tournaments. Like, they're very far behind in points right now, so they have to play great this tournament. Like, this is where they have to make it happen. So seeing them play like this, playing clean in this dungeon, this is what they need to keep doing. The first dungeon, you know, you got to put that in the past for both teams. That was not a great showing for either of them with the boss resets, with the trash wipes. But this is what we want to see from these teams. Well, No Girls Allowed.
No Girls Allowed, right? Pain for Femme definitely just still struggling in this dungeon as well. They're not struggling as much as they did in the Android, because in the Android they just had mistake after mistake. They did execute this very difficult pull with the Bloodlust in Android, but then they just had mistake over mistake. And same thing happening here in Shrine. We see one of the skips not working out again. You see Dilemma dying, having to use this Mass Rest, 9 deaths overall. This is just a problem for Pain for Femme. I'm not completely sure. You know, we talked about this a little bit in the break. I said maybe they're just putting on too much on themselves. Maybe their strategies are just too risky. Maybe they need to go for more consistency. And Tettle said earlier that, you know, maybe it has something to do with practice time. Now, you probably know when you practice for the MDI, as an MDI team, you want to make sure that you make really good use of your time, because there's only 48 hours that you have to even practice for all of those different cup dungeons that you outside of the time trials, of course, because you know those earlier. But 48 hours is really not a lot, so you want to make sure that you have a plan when you go into practice. You can't just try this one huge pull and ignore the rest of the dungeon. You need to make sure that everything is done properly. So the more efficient you are with your practice, the better you're going to do in this cup, and maybe that's a problem that Pain for Femme has. Maybe they're just focusing too much on those really huge pulls, making sure they're executed well, like this one in Underrot, and maybe they don't spend enough time for the rest of the pulls that seem easier, but if you don't practice them enough, then so many things can go wrong.
Yep, I mean, it's kind of insane to mention how much practice these teams have to do. Now, you can kind of have generalized strategies for dungeons, but there are, you know, we are now changing 1 or 2 dungeons a week from Fortified to Tyrannical. We'll swap one dungeon from swap 2 dungeons, you know, back and forth, as well as different affixes on a week-to-week basis. So you can have a generalized strategy, but you know, if a dungeon's teaming, you'll have to change your route. If it's bursting, sometimes you'll have to change your route if you're doing any mass pulls in the dungeon, like for instance in King's Rest with the second boss room. So you can have a generalized strategy, but you have to kind of perfect it for the affixes of the dungeon. So there's just a lot of pre-work that goes into this, and then on top of that you have that 48 hours where you really have to put a lot of practice in. No Girls Allowed has finally entered their second boss phase here. They have their Bloodlust popped, but the boss is at 82%, and I mean, Method EU wasn't able to push it from 74%, so I really doubt they're going to get the one phase in here, even with the massive healer buff that they have on this fight. Of course, you can see that buff on the side of Edelweiss there, that 9-stack buff. That means she has 90% reduced HP, but is doing 180% increased damage and healing as well, so that's why the healer is able to pop off and do a lot of single target damage here.
Yeah, you also see that Edelweiss did proc her staff as well, so the staff doing a lot of damage as well. Now you can see the energy bar on Volsith. Once it reaches 100%, then it will cast the ability that will put them into the intermission phase. And you can see the boss just below 30%, so they definitely do not have enough damage here. Method EU managed to get the boss to 10%, but that's still pretty far off on a tyrannical setting, right? So it just seems like the teams will not be able to one-phase this boss or to only get one intermission unless they really change their setup around specifically for this boss. But then that means you probably also have to you're going to slow down the rest of the dungeon just to get more single target damage on this last boss, which is probably not going to be worth it in the long run either. So just most of the teams probably just going to accept that they're not going to be able to one-phase this. Pain for Femme on the other side of your screen, they did manage to reach Lord Stormsong, sorry. Not have any battle rests ready. They have 10 deaths on their board. So they just, what do they have to do to come back into this tournament, right? Because they're going to be in the lower bracket now, so they still have a chance to get a high seeding. But as you said before, they don't have a lot of time to be able to qualify for BlizzCon. They need to get those points, right? So they just need to get back into the game. They need to maybe shake off some of those nerves. I'm not sure what exactly is happening to them, but right now they're just not performing up to what they have to if they want to qualify.
I mean, as somebody who's been in the lower bracket before, they got a lot of work cut out for them here, but it is possible to come back even all the way to the grand finals with a lower bracket performance. So they can't keep their head out of the game yet. They do have another chance in the lower bracket, but No Girls Allowed is going to be dealing with the final eel pack here, which will put them at 100% trash. And I mean, once again, not necessarily the cleanest 2-0 victory, but you know, slow and steady once again sometimes does win the race. No Girls Allowed going up 2-0 against Pain for Femme.
No Girls Allowed. Again, these are pretty tough dungeons without a question, but definitely was not the No Girls Allowed or Pain for Femme that we had come to know and really start loving and getting a good idea of how well they'd be playing. So they take the victory onto that one, and they will be going up against Method EU a little bit later. But again, more shaky performances here, and then more scuffed execution, really.
I mean, I think this is the second time that we've actually seen No Girls Allowed 2-0 Paint for Femme, so maybe they are just a better quality team. Paint for Femme, they do have some really good pulls and they show some moments of brilliance, but it feels like they just can't shore up their weaknesses, where No Girls Allowed, this dungeon was pretty much the No Girls Allowed show. They were just significantly ahead, especially after the major issues that Paint for Femme had early on. This snap spot with using tricks in snapping all those mobs at Brazier was very nice. We've seen a lot of teams pull this Guardian Elemental this week as well with this bolstering. This is a very good pull, especially since these Guardian Elementals now do give significantly more count with how the trash rebalance ended up working out in Shrine of the Storm. Another interesting thing that happened to No Girls Allowed, I'm actually so surprised they didn't reset this boss.
Gosh.
Trell accidentally got clipped by one of those tornadoes and ended up down on that little lip. And whenever he went to jump back across, the boss actually ended up pathing through and actually ended up not resetting. So they are very, very fortunate that boss didn't end up resetting.
They should have had a priest for grips. Should've.
That's what I saw, right?
Jack, grip me.
I was like, why is he not on the platform? Is he worried about the boss being reset? What happened?
Yeah, so he was down there. Fortunately enough, the boss did not end up resetting. Even with the boss reset, they were still pretty much in a commanding lead just because of major mistakes that we actually did see from Paint for Femme early on.
Yep, and he could have also transcended as well, not to forget about the transcend. He could have had that safety onto that one. But let's start talking a little bit more about some of these larger pulls they were able to pull off here, Tuttles.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the Paint for Femme wipe that they do end up having. Basically, it's off the back of Mero here, end up getting rooted. He doesn't end up shifting that root early enough. He ends up casting a few abilities before shifting it, and then he walks out of range of the Aqualing, which is the major mistake. So basically, if you're in range of melee of the Aqualing and you have threat on it, it won't cast this Sea Blast on you. However, once he actually makes that step out of melee range, the Aqualing starts casting the Sea Blast on him and instantly kills him from like 40% health. And that was basically the death of the run for Paint for Femme, unfortunately enough for them.
He also was even able to take care of the Barrow. You were able to see he was actually able to avoid the knockback, avoid any of the pushback from the boss, and then he got hit by the dot because of how well he timed, or how maybe even poorly he timed his Cloak of Shadows onto that one. So maybe if you delayed by like a second, he could have avoided the dot. Well, I'll have to see.
Should he be in that position?
You should never be in that position.
Yeah.
You're right about that one. And that's why No Girls Allowed is going to be moving on. And Pain for Femme is going to be dropping down into that lower bracket, playing Fly Me Out a little bit later today. So Method EU, No Girls Allowed in that upper bracket, as we're waiting to see how they are going to do against each other. But we also have our next series coming up between Method NA and Depleto Squad.